Hi class, I'm Professor Miller, and I will be talking to you today about my views on the relationship between science and religion. If you study human history, you see that most of human history has been pretty brutal. Um, there were so many wars, so many struggles on a family level, clan level, tribal level, national level, and the standard of living for most people throughout history has not been great. There may be certain periods or spots through history where people did better than other times, but in general, life has been pretty tough for most people. So, people who really wanted to improve their situation or improve the lot of others around them, their main goal has been to try to overcome ignorance about the way things are. In other words, we have seemingly to me two kinds of ignorance: an external ignorance, an ignorance about the world we live in, the physical world, what's it made out of, how does it work, what are the laws and principles governing this world. Then we also have internal ignorance, ignorance about why are we here, why do we exist, why does anything exist, is there a God, is there a purpose to our life. These are questions that people throughout history have tried to grapple with, and in the last couple hundred years at least, we have made quite a bit of progress in the quest for knowledge of the external world. Through research and experimentation, scientists have really sought to understand the nature of the physical universe, the particles, the atoms, the molecules which make it all up, and the principles which govern all physical action and physical life, all physical activity, from the smallest particle to suns, stars, planets, galaxies, the universe. But through religion, other people have sought to understand the cause and purpose of our existence, why anything exists, why we exist. And to answer the question, is there a God? If there is a God, what is that God like? Why do human beings suffer? Is there an afterlife? What should we do about it? Do we have a purpose to our life? And if so, what is that purpose? How do we fulfill it? Now, in the last couple centuries, many commentators have tried to describe the relationship between science and religion as being one of incompatibility. You know, um, sort of like a divorce. I think there was a movie, in Irreconcilable Differences. Uh, that's probably before your time. But anyway, the idea is that there's just irreconcilable differences between science and religion, so the two of them can never get along with each other. Science deals with hard facts, religion deals with myths and beliefs regarding God and an invisible afterlife. Now, it is true that there have been periods of severe conflict between religion and science throughout history. For example, in the early Renaissance, a Dominican friar by the name of Giordano Bruno. He was a friar, but he later converted to Calvinism, and then he developed other weird ideas. The church decided to try him for heresy. And in addition to his controversial theological beliefs, of which there were many, he also had the very strange belief that the stars in the sky were actually suns, just like our sun. But these were suns which were far away and had their own planets around them, just as our sun has planets around it. Well, he was accused of heresy for his theological beliefs and also his scientific beliefs, and as a result, he was severely tortured and put to death, burned at the stake in 1600. In 1543, half century before that, Nicolaus Copernicus was a scientist, philosopher, mathematician living in what is today Poland, and he wrote a treatise stating that he believed that the sun, not the planets, not Earth, was the center of the solar system. And he probably would have gotten into a lot of trouble with that view were it not for the fact that, fortunately or unfortunately, he died shortly after he published his treatise. So nothing ever happened to him other than dying of natural causes. However, uh, 60 or 70 years later, Galileo came out, Galileo, who lived in Pisa, Italy, came out publicly and said that he agreed with Copernicus's view that the sun is the center of the solar system. And so he began to be investigated by the Catholic Church. But initially nothing was done. However, in 1632, he published a treatise that seemed to be attacking Pope Urban VIII. And after this, he was accused of heresy and ordered to publicly recant his views, and was held under house arrest for the next 10 years of his life, which time he died, 1642. Now today, there's no all-powerful church which can persecute scientists. But it is still true today that science has no mechanisms or tools for investigating religious claims, metaphysical claims about the nature of an afterlife or a spirit world or a God. And so it is possible, though, that some scientific views will come into conflict with certain very strongly held dogmatic religious views. But even so, I see no reason why science should automatically have an unavoidable antagonistic relationship to religion or the concept of God. The reason for this is that these two realms of human existence are focusing upon two entirely different areas. As I said, science seeks to understand what is, what exists, how things operate. Scientists don't, you may say scientists are always asking why, but from a scientific point of view, when they say why, what they mean is, how is it possible? How does this happen? If you ask the scientist, why is the sky blue? He's not going to question, why is there a sky or why is there a color blue? He's going to ask you, or he's going to ask himself, how is it that when I look at the sky, it appears blue? What mechanism causes that? And if you up on your high school earth science, you might remember that it was caused by Avogadro's number. Well, it's not caused by Avogadro's number, but it's a result of Avogadro's number. And what is Avogadro's number, you might ask? Well, Avogadro's number, 6.023 times 10 to the 22nd, is the number of molecules in a mole of any substance. And in 1911, Albert Einstein, looking at Avogadro's number, looking at the sky, determined, yes, because of the particular density of molecules in our atmosphere, that is why the sky is blue, because it's like a prism. You shine a light through the prism, and it spreads out the light. You get a rainbow effect, right? It breaks the light into its constituent parts. Well, when sunlight hits our atmosphere, the light is scattered, it's bent in a certain direction, and what we see is that we see the blue streak that comes through a prism. And this is what Einstein discovered and predicted in 1911. So the question was, why is the sky blue? But the answer is, how is it blue? It's blue because there are this many molecules in a certain space, and that's what causing the sunlight to be refracted. Okay, so I'd give you a little tip on, science, in case you get any questions about this someday. Religion, on the other hand, asks the question, why, in a more fundamental way, such as, why do we exist? Why does anything exist? I mean, you ever stop to think about that? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is there a meaning or purpose to our existence? And what should we do with our lives? How should we live if we want to live a good life? In other words, science seeks to establish empirical evidence about what exists and how it works, how it operates. In other words, what is. But what is does not imply ought. In other words, What is doesn't tell us how we ought to live or what are good things to do. Okay, so science is just operating on what is, while religion seeks to make normative judgments, or what you might call action guiding judgments or statements about what is right and wrong, good and bad, and what should we be doing if we want to live a good life. And there's no reason to suspect that these two things have to be in conflict with each other. When I was in graduate school, my professor, my dissertation professor, I was studying ethics, and he said, without facts, ethics aren't worth anything. They aren't worth beans. In other words, you can have all the ethical principles in the world, but if you don't know what's happening, you can't make a good decision. So it's the same thing. There was a time, and I hate to even say this, there was a time, not so long ago, less than a century ago, when people believed that they could flush all their human waste products into the streams and lakes and rivers, and it would just disintegrate. Um, there was a lake. I come from upstate New York. There was a lake near my house. There were two. Well, there were a lot of lakes, but there were two in particular. One had sewage, raw sewage, running into the lake, and you'd see little things floating around in the water. And people say, "Yeah, the water's working. It's getting rid of that stuff eventually." The other lake did not allow raw sewage into the lake, and that was a very nice lake. The first lake was pretty smelly when you went there in hot days of July and August. The other lake was very nice year round. Well, we found out through studying that if you dump raw sewage into lakes and streams, it has devastating effects on what's in the lake and the stream, the fish and whatever else is in there, and it also makes it very bad for human beings to do anything with that water. We should have to, we have to stay away from it. So that's a case where we want to do what's right, and I know you may think this is stupid, that people would actually believe they could just dump their raw sewage in a lake and it wouldn't harm anything. As I said, people are ignorant. People throughout history have been ignorant. And so it was only through the last century that people began to realize we can't do that. You know? So science is very helpful in terms of helping us to understand what's good to do if we want to be friendly to the environment. But by the same token, religion is very important to help us understand how to live with one another. So there's no reason for these two realms of human existence to come into conflict. The conflict comes about because one group or the other, people in one group or in the other group, claim to know more than they actually do. So, for example, certain scientists are on record historically as saying, you don't need God to explain the universe. But one of the basic tenets of modern science is the law of cause and effect. That, in other words, for every effect there's a cause. This is the basis of, whatever, all sorts of science. So if some scientists actually claim you don't need God to explain the universe or the laws of the universe, well, when you ask them what caused the universe, what caused the Big Bang or whatever, they have no answer. They say, oh, the multiverse. Well, what caused the multiverse? In other words, they don't have an answer. In fact, I was reading something the other day that when the Big Bang Theory first came about, it was actually, I'll talk about this in a minute, it was proposed by a Catholic priest who had studied physics and studied Einstein's theories, studied the book of Genesis. And they said this actually corresponds to the book of Genesis. And the atheistic scientists of the day, the astronomers of the day, were very upset with this because at the time, the overriding theory of cosmology is a study of the whole universe. The overriding theory of cosmology at the time was the steady state universe, meaning there's no change in the universe. It doesn't change. There wasn't a beginning, there's not going to be an end. It just is here. But there were some things that didn't make sense because if you study anything about astronomy, you'll hear something called the redshift. When scientists look at distant stars and galaxies, the further away they are, the more they seem to be escaping from us. And so the light tends to become redshifted. I don't have time to go into it today, but it has to do. Think about it when a train goes by or a fire energy goes by. As it comes towards you, the sound waves sort of get compacted because it's coming at you, and the sound waves are coming at you, but the fire truck is coming at you, and so it goes da 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 da, or da 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 da, and as it goes by, it goes da 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 da, it goes down. So it's the same thing happens with light. As it comes toward you, it gets compressed somewhat, and they say it's blue shifted. As it goes away, it's red shifted. And so scientists looking at the universe back in the 30s and 40s saw that distant stars and galaxies were redshifted, like they were all going away from us at a pretty high speed in every direction. And so the steady state theory of the universe did not account for that. And when a Catholic priest came up with this theory of a sort of primordial atom which expanded into the whole universe, they did not like that because it sounded too much like religion. And one rather famous mathematician, I won't mention his name, but he said, we don't want a big bang. If you don't have a big bang, then you don't need a big banger. This was his theory. This is his point, that if you're an atheist, you don't want anything that smacks of God or anything. But the fact is then, people who deny, the priest who came up with this was just observing the evidence. And I'll talk about this in a couple of weeks, but he was right. His theories are accepted today by the vast proportion of cosmologists because his theories predict what is actually observed when people look at distant stars and galaxies. On the other hand, you have various religions and religious doctrines which make very specific claims about the nature of reality with no, they have no proof for it whatsoever. They just make very dogmatic claims. The Earth was made like this, and scientists really don't like that at all. They find it very unsettling. Another problem in dealing with the relationship between religion and science is, well, what do you mean by religion? I don't know what religion any of you belong to: Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhist, Confucianist. If you look on this Encyclopedia of Religion or something, you'll find that there are 12 major religions and 19 sort of major religions and 270 splinter groups. Anyway, there's many, actually hundreds of religions if you want to break it down in a certain way. But 75% of people do belong to the 5 major religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. But even in Christianity, for example, there are a couple hundred denominations, and some people say even as many as 40 or 45,000 if you break it up by country and so forth. But at least there are several hundred denominations just within Christianity. So that means that when you're talking about religion, it's a very broad and kind of amorphous subject. And, what do you mean by religion? So for this course, I'd like to sort of stick to some basic things. We can both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam accept the fact that the Old Testament is revealed by God, and they believe it is contains religious truth, theological truth, metaphysical truth. And we also have at the same time certain claims by scientists in the last 100 years or so which seem to contradict things that are in the Bible. But we'll deal with that as the course goes on. But I want to go back to my assertion that you don't need to have conflict between science and religion, or between scientifically minded people and religiously oriented people. For one thing, I'd like to point out that historically some of the biggest breakthroughs in scientific history were made by people who were devoutly religious. Since the early days of Christianity, Christian scholars have felt that God has given the world 2 books to understand God's nature: the book of nature and the book of Scripture, that is the Bible. It was the belief of these Christian scholars and Jewish scholars that God's nature, as revealed in the Bible, could be perceived in the world that God had created. So they believed that nature further illuminated Scripture, and at the same time, Scripture further illuminated nature. In the 17th century, for example, Isaac Newton, I'm sure you've all heard of Isaac Newton. He was a devout Unitarian Christian. He was also an alchemist, or he sought to be an alchemist, wanted to change lead into gold and do all sorts of crazy stuff. Um, some people claim he's the first great scholar of the Enlightenment. Um, some people say he was the last great magician of the Middle Ages because he was truly magic. He was just so brilliant. He's beyond understanding. But my contention is he believed in God, and he believed that God was a rational creator, and therefore had endowed human beings with reason, a rational mind. So Newton felt it was entirely feasible for human beings to understand the physical laws governing the universe. As a result, it was he who came up with laws governing gravity and motion, Newton's three laws of motion, which have been the foundation for modern physics for the last 300 or 400 years. It helps explain why, momentum, gravity, the relationship of planets and how they revolve around the sun, etc. So again, here's a guy who was deeply religious, and because he was religious, he believed that he could understand nature, and he made great leaps forward. In the 19th century, that's 1840s and 50s, 60s, Gregor Mendel was an Augustinian monk living in an abbey in what is today Czechia. Between the years 1856 and 1863, he had a little garden plot, and he noticed that he grew peas, and he noticed that some of the pea plants were very tall, some were very short. Others had white flowers on them, before they gave off their peas. Others had purple flowers. So he decided to do a number of experiments cross-pollinating these plants. And so he would mix the purple with the white and the tall with the short. And he found out that there were dominant characteristics and recessive characteristics. And if you've studied anything about biology and inheritance and genetics, you'll know that if you have a dominant and a recessive, if you have two dominants, the dominant um, strain will come out. If you have a dominant and recessive, the dominant will still come out. In order for recessive strain to come out, you need two recessive genes. Okay, so Mendel discovered this actually around the same time that Darwin was doing his experiments and observations on evolution. And unfortunately, I guess for Mendel, he published his work the same year that Darwin published his work. And because Darwin's work was very sort of explosive to the world, Darwin got a lot of press, and Mendel got forgotten about for 30 years. But in the early 1900s, three scientists from different parts of the world, all independently of one another, rediscovered Mendel's writings. And Mendel's laws of inheritance, or what we would now say genetics, came to the fore and became very prominent in the 20th century. In the 20th century, I just mentioned there was a Belgian physicist, Catholic priest named Georges Lemaître, who, after reviewing Einstein's equations of general relativity and comparing them to the book of Genesis, the creation story there, decided that the universe began with a big bang because God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And Lemaître just actually described, based on Genesis and general relativity, what he thought the early universe would look like. And uh, actually, in recent years, I don't know, it was like 15 or 20 years ago, scientists at Princeton and some other place were looking at um, through radio telescopes and noticing there's something going on in the distant universe, which looks like a big smudge or something. Um, and they find out this is the cosmic microwave background radiation. And this is what's left over from the Big Bang at the very origin of the universe, before even matter was created. In other words, light came before matter. This is astonishing because Lemaître predicted this almost 100 years ago. Anyway, this is a case where three very amazing scientific breakthroughs were brought about by religious people who were determined to try to understand the scientific nature of the universe. I will say this, that Lemaître was kind of scoffed at originally. He was not taken seriously, partly, largely because at that time, many astronomers were atheists, and they absolutely didn't want anything that smacked of religion, and so they resisted him for some time until it became obvious that his predictions were irrefutable. But finally, the point I want to make is that, in my opinion, and in the opinion of Albert Einstein, good science is possible because of good intuition. And I believe that religion is the same way. Einstein said that the way that scientific breakthroughs happen is not by crunching the numbers and just making experiments. The point is through intuition. When you do an experiment or have or observe something, or you have an intuition about what's going on, and then you make a theory, and then you find ways to test that theory to see whether it will be validated or refuted. But the starting point is you have to have intuition. You have to have some creative thought put into it. And it has to be good intuition. It has to be sensible. And the same thing is true of religion. You know, in the book of Matthew, I believe it is chapter 7, verse 20, Jesus says, by their fruits you will know them. In other words, you can tell a good tree by whether it's got good fruit or not. In the same way, you can tell good ideas, good religious ideas, but by what kind of fruit they bear. If the fruits that you're trying to give to this world are things that bring about peace and harmony and cooperation, those are pretty good things. So even Richard Feynman, who by all accounts is an avowed atheist, he said that there's no reason for science and religion to fight about things. Science can't make claims about metaphysics or an invisible world. Science can't make claims about how people feel when they serve God and they feel inspired. Science can't analyze that. But what science can do is look at the fruits of people who profess a God of goodness or a religion of goodness. When you are saying that we should love one another and help one another and be good and kind to another, we should talk to each other, we should respect each other, we should act civilly. Well, that's a good thing. And science needs that just as much as anybody else does. If we don't treat each other with civility and we don't respect one another, then we can't talk to one another. And even if you look at science so many times, someone who came up with a brilliant idea was rejected for years, decades, because the people who were in power didn't want to hear it. And only after like the old fogies all died, then the younger people said, hey, that's not a bad idea. We should go with that. Even Einstein faced this. In fact, Einstein faced this even when he was older. People doubted him and said he was all wrong. And it was only 20, 30 years after he died that people found out, no, actually the things he predicted, they're really true. So anyway, I believe that there's no reason why science and religion should not get along, especially if we think about how we should act, how we should treat one another. And so we can find common ground with people, even, I don't care if they're atheist, agnostic, deeply religious, superficially religious, doesn't matter. If we could just learn to talk and act together and respect one another, then I believe that both science and religion can have a very incredibly positive impact on the world in which we live. And I think, given the way the world is going right now, I think we all need it. I hope you will all agree with me. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again later.